Hello again, it's me, that guy with the YouTube channel, and today we're changing it up a little bit, not just doing a little review. Today we're going to be looking at some Kaiju figures I've customized. Not exactly rocket science, that's what we're going to be doing. King Caesar from Bandai Creation. What I do with this? I repainted it. It's also not exactly rocket science. Yeah, basically what I did was painted his main body a different shade of brown, except the hair. That hair was good, just the body, that pale brown with that ugly wash on it, just didn't work for me. So I repainted it, and I also redid the nails, either an off-white color with a black highlight around the base of the nail where it goes into the appendage. Eyes, I painted a glossy red, and thankfully the pupils were just painted on, not sculpted, because those were a stupid thing that I really wish they didn't add on this figure, but it was there anyway, so I got rid of it. And I also lightened up this kind of crown-looking section on his head, just because in the thing I painted green there. I also added these little heel spikes to him, which he does have in the movie. I really don't blame Bandai Creation for excluding these, though, because you can't even tell anyway. So this is a thing. It exists, apparently. So this next one is another Bandai Creation, and it is the Gigan 2004. And obviously, as you can tell, I have made it a fossilized Gigan. Yeah, this Gigan figure was not in good shape. In fact, you can even see there, he's missing one of his wings, and yeah, his arms were broken off. He was just in really bad shape, basically unsalvageable. So I got some shitty Crayola brand air dry clay, mixed that with water, and got some slip out of it. Then just really lathered the whole thing up in the air dry clay, except his claws, obviously, and then painted him to look like he was covered in stone and rock, and I think it turned out pretty good. Obviously there's no articulation on this anymore. If it even did have any more, it would just be the head and legs, because the arms were broken off at one point and glued back on. This thing was a mess, is what I'm trying to get across. Also, the slip is chipping off in places just because it's shitty air dry clay. So this next custom is another Bandai Creation, and one you may have seen in my earlier videos, but nothing like how you're going to see it now. Rodan 2004. Flying Rodan. Flying Rodan. Flying Rodan. Yes, I customized this into a Flying Rodan. Because if you've seen any of my earlier videos, which I'm sorry if you have, you would know that this used to make appearances in those quite often. But it was awful. It was like gray and black paint slopped all over it, and I tried to make his mouth open, and it was awful, and I regret everything I did to it. So obviously, not being able to turn it back into a normal Rodan, I decided, why not make it into a Flying Rodan? Flying Rodan. Yeah, so anyways, I turned it into a Flying Rodan. I cut off his head, glued it back on looking upward, then filled in the gaps with Abe's epoxy sculpt, which I think turned out okay, even though you can kind of see a seam line where the head was cut off, but it's not super noticeable. And did the same with the legs, although not as nice looking as the head. And obviously, as you can tell, I've repainted him completely from the ground up. He's kind of brown color now, dry brushed with this beige, and highlights of black here and there along his wings and hair, or whatever that is. And the eyes are still green, although they are completely repainted. One thing I would like to try and redo one day is pull the neck out right here a little bit to make him looking up more, because, yeah, that just kind of looks weird, like he's swooping down or something. He does still have articulation in his head, though, and in the one foot, but not this one, because it was shorter than the other leg for some reason, so I had to Flying Rodan, fill it in, Flying Rodan, Flying Rodan. Continuing with the theme of Bandai creation figures I've had to restore, Godzilla 1968. Yeah, as you can see, I've closed his mouth and changed the positioning of his hand and arm, as well as giving him a brand new paint job. Yeah, I don't know if this figure ever showed up in any of my earlier videos, but if it did, you would know this thing looked atrocious. Because when I was a kid and I had this, I tried making him into a 73 figure, and all I did was cut his eyebrows off. It looked awful. Then I tried making him into a Jiris figure by covering him in green paint, and then I tried turning him back, but I didn't get the paint off, and then I put silver in places on him, and it was atrocious. It was a mess, and it was a nightmare. And I wanted to, have this figure look presentable and not like something that belongs in the trash. And that's what I did. So yeah, I redid his head, cut off his mouth and closed it because I didn't really like the way it looked to begin with on the figure. And yeah, I basically just cut off his mouth and cut the roof of his mouth out and then glued it in a closed position. Then filled in the gaps with epoxy sculpt, just like Rodan. Yeah, and then I also redid his eyebrows, because, again, those were cut off, and I think they turned out pretty well. Hand I also resculpted just because I didn't like that weird, I can't even make that pose with my hand. I have no idea what they were going for with that, but it looked weird, so I cut the thumb off, glued it back on, then filled in the gaps with the clay, obviously. This arm I cut off, and I put a structural armature thingy in there. Glued it in, obviously. And then put the arm on and filled in the gaps with epoxy sculpt, just like the other parts of this figure. Are you noticing a trend with this figure here? Yes. He's big on his brown toenails. Yeah, resculpted the arm just because I wanted a little more character to the pose of this figure. And obviously he's been entirely repainted, base coat of black, dry brushed gray with the slightly darker gray highlights here and there, and silver spines, because I felt like it. And yeah, it retains all of its articulation, the arms move, the legs move, even the tail. Paint's still kind of tacky though. I used a high heat resistant spray paint on him. I've seen other people use that, and yeah, it didn't dry very well on this figure for some reason. But yeah, it's there, it exists. His arm can do that. It's useful. So next, this is where the customs get much more elaborate, with Matan Go. Yeah, Matan Go. And unlike the other figures you've seen so far, Matan Go doesn't use a Kaiju figure as a body, or as a base. He uses some weird silver jumpsuit guy dude thing I found laying around. Yeah, so I basically took that and covered it in epoxy sculpt to make it look like Matan Go. He's got all his little mushrooms on his mushroom, and his little things hanging off of his mushroom, and his hands are mushrooms with mushrooms, and there's mushrooms on his feet. He's a mushroom. I don't know where I'm going with that. And next, we come to the only Ultra Monster custom I've made, and, well, obviously the first one. Nova. Nova. Nova, Nova, Nova. Nova, Nova, Nova. Yeah, this, like Matan Go, doesn't use any Kaiju figure as a base. In fact, it doesn't use any full figure as a base at all. This is what's under his robes. Nova, Nova, Nova. Yeah, I didn't actually have enough. I didn't have a base body used for this figure, so I just kind of compiled together some random parts of broken figures I don't even know where they came from. and then sculpted them, and yeah, Nova is kind of an extremely easy custom to make. All you really need to do is have the basic skills to sculpt the head, axe, and whips, and you can pretty much use anything for the other parts of him because they're covered up by his robes. Yeah, sculpted his head, his axe, his whips, obviously. To this base body was a torso, which didn't have legs, so I used this one giant leg that I don't even know where I got. And then obviously put the cloth parts on him. And he does have articulation. His arm is a axe arm, can move up and down, swivel at the elbow, forward and backward. And the whips have a little more. They can actually bend at the elbow. You can do that with him. Yeah, you can get some poses out of him, obviously, because he uses that giant leg. He does have some articulation if you want to get him to stand differently. There really isn't a whole lot to say about Nova. You can see I've used staples to get his robe to sit in the right position. I also ran him under the sink once I got the robe on him, just to get it to lay in a better position. There's his backside too. I know people come to these videos to see Nova's backside. I've been lacking on that. Here is Nova's backside. And the final custom, which is one I just finished the night before recording this, Young Gary. Yes, a 6-inch Young Gary custom that I not from the film Young Gary. Yeah, he uses a Godzilla 1954 Bandai Creation figure as a base, the first release, not the second one, which I had lying around. It didn't have arms, so I figured why not turn it into Young Gary, since I already have 2 other 54 figures. His hands are off of a Godzilla Final Wars Bandai Creation figure, which I only had the arms for that figure. I don't know where the actual figure itself went. So I just cut the hands off. The arms are completely sculpted from scratch, except the hands, because the 54 figure had no arms. Spines were cut off, and I resculpted the back. And I did take some liberties with the design. In fact, I took a lot of liberties, like he only has 1 row of spines. He's blue, and he's got a little bit of dark green on him, but you can't really tell. Even though in the movie he's gray, has 3 rows, his toenails aren't white. Yeah, it's just a lot of liberties taken with this design. But so I'm having trouble finding out how to end this video. I don't know if I should do an outro. I don't know if I should size them. They are 6-inch figures. You should know how big most of them are. Here's Woo with them. Here's this with them. It's there in the frame, kind of. Should I end it here? Maybe yes, no. I'm gonna go now. Bye.